Okay, I got to make a ruling here. According to my records, Reed Nicewonder was here first, but I don't think I can hand out pine points to a moderator. At least I don't want to. Plus, Reed has so many pine points that he already filled up one bank account and he had to open up a new account because the first account was full. So I'm going to give the 1,000 pine points to Peter. You know what? I'm getting a little sick and tired of the whole morality discussion and debate and arguing back and forth between believers and non-believers. But this was encouraging to me, what happened last night on David Wood's channel, Acts 17 Apologetics, link in the description. And that is he, Inspiring Philosophy, I think, admitted that he agrees with me and he agrees with Paul from Apologia that really biblical morality is about maximizing well-being. So I think that's my standard, is maximizing well-being, and that's, I think, Paul's standard maybe, and it seems like Inspiring Philosophy has the same standard. So we're all in this together, right? It's like there's no more disagreements. We all have this standard of maximizing well-being. Now, where we differ, I guess, is what some philosophers call the ontology of it all. Where does it all stem from? That's where we differ. But I don't need no stinking ontology. It's almost to that point where I don't care what the ontology is. Why should I, if the more important part is the epistemology, how we figure out what's right and wrong? To me, that's way more important than the ontology, because what good is ontology? What is good is Inspiring Philosophy's ontology of Yahweh. Let's say he's right, and that's where the ontology, where morality is rooted, the foundation that cannot be shooken. What if that's true? Who cares if we can't know anything about it? But Doug, we know about it because we have these moral intuitions that God has impressed on our hearts, my heart, your heart. And if that's the case, then, you don't need a belief in God then. I think Inspiring Philosophy would agree. You don't need a belief in God to explain morality. We can just say it's from our moral intuitions. And Inspiring Philosophy says just that in this video. I actually think a lot of Christians are not going to be happy. And a lot of Christians probably don't even understand what's going on. But welcome. Any new names here? If you're new, let me know and hopefully tag me and maybe I'll see you. It's always good to meet new people online that are not stalkers. I'm talking to one person right now. You know who you are. Okay, let's play. I'm not going to play all of it, of course, but I got some timestamps here that I'm going to fast forward and talk about. But David Wood, is it Wood or Woods? Is it David Woods or David Wood? Someone help me out here. But David, he started the live stream saying he's going to try to not strawman, to accurately represent Paul in his video on Apologia. And he, which I commend, but this is what he says.
For some reason, and we talked about this last week when we were talking about the moral argument, Michael, is this your experience that when atheists try to state what our arguments are and what the moral argument is, or what these various, the ontological argument is it your experience that they almost never, there are exceptions, but they almost never state accurately what our argument is?
I'd say about 75% of the time, in my experience, yeah. It's like the moral argument is...
That's actually surprisingly low. I would think would be higher than that people would misrepresent you, IP. Here's I'm going to try to help build the bridge between theists and non-theists, between guys like me and guys like them. Keep your expectations low. You should assume that every time I do a video that I will misrepresent you. Just assume that. And then when I don't, you're happy, right? You're pleasantly surprised. And that's how I actually view most Christians. My expectations are low. If they ever do a video on me, I don't assume they're going to represent me well or present my opinions. Or the default position is straw manning. If you're a Christian, I think you even agree with this, that since we are children of the darkness and don't walk in the light, and the Holy Spirit hasn't guided us to all truth, then of course we're going to get things wrong. We're going to misrepresent you and straw man you. That's the default position. Accept it and deal with it. And then when it doesn't happen, you're so happy. I tell you, I've just brought joy in your life by lowering your expectations.
It's about moral ontology, and a lot of times atheists tend to confuse that with moral epistemology or normative ethics. And
Okay, so the bottom line is Paul made a video, a challenge, which we're going to get to, and I think Inspiring Philosophy and David Wood are talking about how Paul just didn't understand. It's just these atheists just don't understand, and Paul mixed up moral ontology with moral epistemology, and Inspiring Philosophy says the moral argument is about ontology, not epistemology. I'm not sure, did Paul even bring up the moral argument in his challenge at all? It's interesting to me that Inspiring Philosophy, well, maybe I'm wrong here, but I don't think Paul did bring up the moral argument. Maybe he alluded to it. But it's amazing to me that Inspiring Philosophy immediately sees this moral challenge as a threat to the moral argument, which tells me that we'll get into it. Okay, I'm going to, by the way, I was in the live stream chat in this, when this was happening live last night. And one of the first things I said was, here we have all these philosophers philosophizing, and a lot of Christians don't understand the moral argument, talking about atheists misrepresenting the moral argument. A lot of Christians don't understand it. They don't understand the ontological arguments, a lot of them, moral arguments, even the cosmological arguments. And Christian apologists admit this. That's why we need more apologetics, so we can help Christians understand these things. But the bottom line is most, and I'll use the word most Christians just love Jesus. It's not about philosophical arguments for God. Now, they like hearing what they perceive as smart people, and I'm not saying these guys are not smart. I actually think Inspiring Philosophy is smart. They perceive smart people who are Christian defending things and say, see, look, I can now be rest assured that everything's okay because smart people, they've looked at these things and they're Christian, so I don't have to think about it that much. And I don't blame most people for doing that because got to keep in mind half of the population has an IQ below 100, right? Okay, and then talking about misrepresentation, here's another little short clip here.
It's a very hard study to explain.
Sorry, I'm laughing at the atheists over here. Check out, there's a level of atheist argumentation over here. DW fears those who do not have sky wizard delusions. That's like the same comment by the last 900 atheists who came to my channel.
Okay, now notice he's laughing. That I guess some atheist made some sky wizard comment.
You need a sky daddy. You need a sky wizard. You need a magic dragon in the sky.
I've gotten to the point where atheists start insulting me, and I just kind of laugh. I'm like, yeah, that's great, man. Whatever.
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with it if it wasn't so completely unoriginal, right? It's like,
if it's so unoriginal, why were you laughing? You're still laughing at it. When these sort of things happen to me, and it does, Christians don't think that this sort of thing is just one way. When it happens to me, I just laugh it off. I hope that it's original and funny, but it seems like the whole sky wizard thing still entertains you, David. So I wouldn't, if it makes you smile and makes you happy, then keep it coming. Let them do it. Okay, let's move into the main meat of the video.
Break down those terms as much as we can. If you do not understand some term, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Try to get it, but if you don't get it, we will be breaking down the issues in a way that should be perfectly clear. So again, if you're seeing a term and you can't get your mind around that term, I'm saying this because I know from experience when I study certain kinds of philosophy, I can't figure out what they're saying. So it's like when I study continental philosophy, I will sit there and read it and I don't understand what they're saying. So I think there's a problem with me, and then I read it again and read it again and read it again. I still can't understand what the continental philosophers are saying. And then eventually I start thinking that they're not actually saying anything. So I start making fun of continental philosophy and stuff like that. But
yeah, I know exactly how you feel, David Wood. I know exactly how you feel. Sometimes I wonder if some philosophers are saying anything at all. But again, this gets back to my point of most Christians just love Jesus. And when you're throwing out how most atheists are misrepresenting Christian philosophers or philosophical arguments, keep in mind I would even dare to say more Christians misrepresent than non-Christians, because definitely they're the ones that are more interested in it and try to mimic it and so forth. And a lot of atheists, for example, are ex-Christians and have studied these philosophical arguments maybe more so than people who just love Jesus and don't care to study these philosophical arguments. So it just boggles my mind that Christians need to use philosophical arguments to demonstrate stuff, which doesn't even demonstrate anything at all. It's like, do I need a philosophical argument to predict that this pen will fall? No. And there's something inside me that just believes. I just believe that this will fall. I can't explain it. It's in the core of my being that I know that this will fall when I let go. But it seems like with these philosophical arguments, they're so hard to understand and communicate. And I am of the opinion that theists use philosophical arguments, not all the time, just not Christians use philosophical arguments to not feel stupid that a man rose from the dead. I think this is the bottom line.
But I don't know. I don't know if they're actually saying anything. I can't understand what they're saying. So no shame in not understanding something we're about to say, especially if this stuff is new. But try to follow along, and we'll certainly do our best to break down. But basically, I'm going to hand things over now to Michael. He's going to give you a little introduction to how we're using these terms and so on. Introduction to how we're using these claims when we talk about the moral argument and so on.
Hey, Michael, if you hear this live stream, you can drive on down to my place. I got a chair here, and you can sit right next to me.
And then after that, we'll get into the video, and we'll see what you guys think of the video. All right, you ready for your first slide here?
Yeah, let's put the first slide up. So the problems with this video is it's conflating a lot of different branches in ethics. So what do we mean by ethics? Ethics is the study of what is right and wrong, good or evil, the study of moral principles that govern a person's behavior, the conducting of an activity, or what is valuable. That's a very colloquial definition, something we have to discover in nature. How do we know? So,
okay, I fast-forwarded to the punchline here. So here's all the definitions that Inspiring Philosophy thinks is important to address Paul's challenge. You got to know the difference between metaethics and normative ethics. I think the real thing you need to look at here is moral ontology versus moral epistemology. Moral ontology is the essence of what it is, and moral epistemology is how we know what it is. And a moral epistemology is actually similar to normative ethics, and moral ontology is similar to metaethics, and so forth. But as we see, I really don't think this matters that much, because I don't think even Paul is addressing the moral argument here, which Inspiring Philosophy keeps repeating back and forth. Now, I could be wrong about this. Maybe Paul's whole purpose, it's been a while since I've watched it, and I've only watched it through this video, and but I don't think Paul even used the phrase moral argument. Paul, if you're here, let me know. If you're in the live stream chat, say something. Okay, so those are the definition that Inspiring Philosophy feels that you should know. And again, if you just love Jesus, you probably haven't heard of these things before. But if you're an apologist, of course, this is everyday stuff.
So Just so you guys know, ontology, that's the when you're talking about ontology, you're talking about things like existence and the being of a thing. So that's the main question we're asking with the moral argument, right? So if you're sitting with an atheist and you say, hey, I want to know, you're condemning this and you're saying God should do this and God ought to do that and Christians are bad for this and religion is bad for that. I'm interested in understanding what you mean by this claim that it's bad, or that
it's bad compared to a standard.
Christians are wrong for doing this, or that Muslims are wrong for doing that. Or I'm interested in what you mean. Do you mean that you just don't like it? Do you mean that they're doing something that goes against what your society teaches is right? Do you mean that it goes...
What do you mean? Like, these questions can be asked right back to you. What do you mean when you say God is good? Well, it just reflects his nature. And, well, what does his nature really mean? What is his nature? What is it?
Goes against something, you're sort of hardwiring against your herd instinct. What exactly do you mean by this claim? Because here's the problem in a nutshell. I'm saying this because we know, we know, especially if you've never heard terms like epistemology and ontology and things like that, normative things like that, we know they can be difficult to grasp, even if we break them down. It can be difficult to keep them clear in your mind. So at least get the gist. What is the status of that moral claim that such and such is right or such and such is wrong? What is the status there? So that's when we say that, when we ask that, we're asking about ontology, right? What?
Dave Friskin, and ontology is the hypothetical, he says in the live stream chat. It's what we don't know. And yeah, that's exactly why I say epistemology is way more important than ontology, because you can have the ontology, but who cares about the ontology if you can't know what it is?
What is that?
Or if you don't have a reliable way of figuring out what it is.
That thing. What is that moral claim, right?
What is it?
Yeah. And so that's what we're asking.
By the way, for the record, me and Inspiring Philosophy actually agree on the main points in this video. I don't think I have any disagreement with him on the main points of Apologia's challenge.
Atheist, because when a Muslim says stealing is forbidden, I know what the Muslim means. When a Jew says something, I know what the Jew means. When a Christian says something, I know what the Christian means. When various people from various backgrounds say things, I understand what they mean. Even when an atheist who is trying to be consistent with his worldview says...
Trying to be consistent. It's like, this is something that both me and Paul kind of worked on. For Christians who don't believe in atheists, they sure talk about atheists a lot. It's like, I think everybody struggles to be consistent in their worldview at times, yes, David would, but of course he points it out with the atheists because I guess he views atheism as a threat. I don't know. There's only 2 or 3% of atheists in the world. You guys should not even be talking about atheists, but it seems like so many Christian channels, that's all. They love us, I guess.
That, morality is relative or something like that. I understand what he means, and then I understand what he means.
Oh, Apologia's in the live stream chat. I have a question for you, Paul. Did you use the phrase moral argument in your challenge video? Did you reference the philosophical argument, the moral argument in your video? As far as I remember, you didn't, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Means by his moral claims. And I would say, based on the video, I seem to understand Apologia's view of morality as far as what it is. It's sort of wired into us by evolution because the evolution has produced creatures that have to survive, because you wouldn't have survived if you weren't wired like that. And so we're sort of wired to seek the well-being of human beings and so on.
Right.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and when we get to that point in the video, and that's one of the confusions coming in, that's confusing moral epistemology with moral ontology. Because if you're a theistic evolutionist, you could say God directed evolution to make us learn what morality actually is. Just because it's wired into us, that doesn't mean, just because what's wired into us is how we understand morality, that doesn't mean that's all that morality is. And that's a huge conflation right there. And that's one of the things that bothered me in the video.
Yeah, the thing is, though, what Paul's video is trying to do is, you'll hear a lot of theists, a lot of Christians say, well, how do you explain morality? If there's no God, how do you explain morality? Now, what do they mean by how do you explain? Well, they're trying to see, well, we see things, we intuit things, we feel things, we do things, and seems like human nature is like we all, not all, but most of us who are not psychopaths, have certain revulsions of certain things. You know, it's on a spectrum, but we have certain revulsions and we have certain proclivities and desires for certain things. Like we all like to drink water when we're thirsty, right? And we all don't like to sleep in -5-degree weather. And it seems like there's some similarities between us Homo sapiens. And so what Paul is doing here is he's saying, well, maybe we can explain this morality in a way that has no need for a God. That's the crux of it. Okay, I'm going to fast forward it right into to Paul's challenge or definition of morality, I think, first.
Simply as...
Okay, evaluation of how well an action will achieve some desired goal or outcome. So, what if the desired outcome is as much power as possible, and so you try to slaughter everyone who gets in your path, and so your actions would be geared towards reaching that goal or outcome, and so anything you do, no matter how many people you're slaughtering, if your goal or outcome is as much power as possible, well, your acts would be moral.
Okay, so basically what David Wood's saying here is he doesn't like the punchline is he doesn't like Apologia's definition. And I think inspiring philosophy comes to Paul's defense here in a bit. But I want you to listen to what David Wood is saying here. He's giving an example of why this definition is bad. But I want you to think of Yahweh in the Old Testament as David Wood is talking here. Oh, yeah, Christians are going to hate me for this. Think about Yahweh in the Old Testament as David Wood is talking.
Simply as...
Okay, evaluation of how well an action will achieve some desired goal or outcome. So, what if the desired outcome is as much power as possible, and so you try to slaughter everyone who gets in your path, and so your actions would be geared towards reaching that goal or outcome, and so anything you do, no matter how many people you're slaughtering, if your goal or outcome is as much power as possible, well, your acts would be moral by that in that sense.
Yeah, Yahweh's acts were moral according to David Wood's worldview. Well, he was using his power. He doesn't need to seek out power. He already has it, right? So, but while using his power and slaughtering people, under this definition of morality, that's good. By the way, when I was in this live stream chat, I asked the question of if Yahweh caused the most extreme suffering on every human on the planet, starting tomorrow for, let's say, 3 hours. Starting tomorrow for 3 hours, everyone on the planet has the most unimaginable pain and suffering that you can imagine. According to David Wood, and I think even Inspiring Philosophy, if that were true, all those pesky hypotheticals, if that were true, that would be moral and good. I asked that question in the live stream chat a few times, and I tell you, Christians will run from that question, except for one. There was one guy who said, yeah, of course that'd be good. If Yahweh actually did that, if Yahweh actually caused the most extreme suffering on the planet, that'd be good by definition. And I immediately gave him 1,000 pine points because I like to reward good behavior from Christians.
And that's kind of the difficulty I have with talking about desired goals or something like that. It's very common for atheists to say, whatever achieves the most well-being, or whatever achieves the most happiness, or whatever achieves us maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain, or something like that. And you lay these things down.
And you know what? Inspiring Philosophy agrees with that idea of maximizing well-being. He just thinks the way you do it is to be a slave for Christ. And I purposely use that word slave. The way you maximize well-being, according to the Christian, is to be a slave for Christ. So I don't think Inspiring Philosophy disagrees with what David Wood is saying right here.
And then the idea is, well, why is that? Why is that the goal at which all things should aim? You could say, well, why not? I'd say, yeah, but suppose someone comes along and says, I just do not care about how much pleasure you have. I want something else. How do you say, well, you're wrong and I'm right?
See, this is the crux of it all. And this is where I'm going to judge. It says in the Bible not to judge, but I'm going to disobey. And I'm going to judge David Wood here. He has a psychological need to look at someone and say, that's really wrong, or that's really right. There's this desire in a lot of Christians to have the gravitas, to have that backing. Well, because of, I can say, that's wrong, really wrong. Now, because you don't believe in, then you can't say it. You can just, this is just your opinion. But the opinion that counts is the opinion of Yahweh. Well, we shouldn't even call it an opinion because it's his decree.
How do you make that claim? So, I have a bit of a difficulty here, but let's let it slide. And
I really do think that's an issue for many people. It's that the psychological need for the gravitas, the backing, the oomph to say something's really, really wrong in all situations, in all time. But then they'll admit that morality is subjective, because from the Old Testament to the New Testament, it seems like that Yahweh was so sensitive and gracious to grade cultures on some type of moral curve, slowly introduce them to new ways of, getting rid of slavery and that sort of thing. Because you just can't, people would have died if you didn't have slavery back then. So you got to do things slowly. Okay, let's, I'm going to fast forward here. They do a lot of talking before they even get to Paul's main challenge. And for those of you who haven't seen this challenge, you're in for a real treat.
Ever felt remorse in my life? And no, I don't even know what you guys mean when you're talking about that. So anyway.
So I'm actually, well, before you go, I'm kind of glad you stopped it here, because I know he's trying to use these for lack of a better term, but I would say there really is no such thing as Bible morality. The Bible has
I think I know what Paul meant when he said Bible morality, but it seems, I just wish Christians would not misrepresent Paul, and I wish they could just understand Paul. And what Paul is saying by Bible morality, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, because I think you're still in the live stream chat, but you're saying the God of the Bible, his morality. So that avoids confusion with other types of gods that have different standards of morality or say different things. So Bible morality is the God of the Bible and what he says about morality, the outflowing of that God's nature, the God of the Bible, Yahweh, Jesus, Holy Spirit.
Moral claims in it, but we don't say that morality necessarily, keyword necessarily, has to come from the Bible. The Bible clarifies, repeats, claims or gives moral claims, but morality, especially in where we say it comes from in metaethics, if you're a moral realist like Christians typically are, it comes from intuition. Romans.
Where does morality come from? Intuition. Who has intuition? Most humans, ones that are conscious. Chapter
2, God has written the law in our hearts. You don't necessarily need the Bible to know what is moral.
And Inspiring Philosophy is smart for saying this because there were humans before there were the Bible was written. So you don't need the Bible to have this moral code. Actually, some people, I think even remember Cy ten Bruggencate saying that murder wasn't objectively wrong until Yahweh wrote on the tablets with his finger that it was. And guys like Inspiring Philosophy are smart enough to say that's stupid. God's moral standard existed before the actual Bible existed. And that makes perfect sense and a lot more sense than what Cy said.
This is
that's even according to the Bible, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't like using the term Bible morality. I know he's using it for lack of a better term, as he said, but it's sort of setting up almost a straw man, which he's going to come back to later, because there really isn't Bible morality.
So always assume an atheist will straw man you. That way, if you kind of sense that they're representing you well, then you're going to be so happy, and you're going to remember this moment, and you're going to thank me. Thank you, PineCreek, for setting my expectations low.
The Bible it includes morality, but it encompasses more. It's not like we have to say we have to get our morality from the Bible. We can say that the Bible, teaches things that we know to be moral. It confirms things we know to be moral. It may shed some more light on.
We're trying to understand exactly what someone means. So just to recap what's going on right here, you have, apparently he means Bible morality is basically everything that the Bible says about morality, and some of that is going to overlap with what other people believe, some of it isn't. And then the psychopath is way out there when I don't know. The psychopath might touch these other ones, and that the psychopath wants to destroy you if you do something. If you do something wrong to him, so you could say, well, as long as you agree, you could say, hey, if you and I agree that it's wrong to harm me, so we got that
Maybe.
point in agreement.
I don't know. We can move on now.
All right, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm starting at 3, and then we're going to go forward. All right.
Fallen world, you'd expect fallen evaluations. Some philosophers who think about such things claim that when it comes down to it, humans generally evaluate actions in light of reducing harm and increasing well-being. And because we are a social species, that the further we extend these considerations beyond ourselves, to family, to tribe, to nation, to species, and so on, and extend them from short-term to long-term time periods, the more success we have in surviving. For the sake of discussion, imagine that this blue circle represents a moral system that wants to maximize well-being over the longest term and over the greatest scope of beings.
Yeah, and I think most Christians believe that morality does equal maximum well-being. They just say you have the maximum well-being when you serve Christ, when you're a slave to Christ, when you take up your cross and follow Christ, when you're a Christian. That's when you have the maximum well-being. Because what's more maximum than living for eternity in heaven with God? You can't beat that. That's the most maximum well-being you can get. So it's really interesting to me that where a lot of atheists and Christians are disagreeing, they're actually not disagreeing. They're agreeing that morality at its root is about maximizing well-being. They just think that the ontology is God, and guys like me who think the ontology is nature itself. Okay, here we go.
And so we'll evaluate actions purely according to this criteria.
Well, I'm stopping at 3:45 because I just had a huge problem with something you said there.
Yeah, me too. I had 2 problems, but yeah, go ahead.
I'll state my problem, then you can point yours out. It was how he. Let's see if I can find the point where he says it again, so I make sure I state it accurately.
Periods, the more success we have in surviving. For the sake of discussion, imagine that this blue circle represents a moral system that wants to maximize well-being over the longest term and over the greatest scope of beings. And so...
Oh, yeah. It was him saying that the blue represents maximizing well-being for whatever he said, and the greatest number of beings. The reason I have a problem with that, ladies and gentlemen, is if you say over the greatest number of beings, then you should annihilate humanity. Right? If that's what you mean. If you mean greatest number of beings, notice you're not just talking about human beings here, right? You're talking about dogs, cats, you're talking about ants, you're talking about all kinds of insects, worms, you're talking about trees. Even if
this is a good point from David Wood, is where do you draw that line on maximizing well-being? Is it just for your tribe? Is it just for your country? Of course not. Is it just for humans? This is where it starts to get a little shaky. Do we view morality as maximizing the well-being of your pets? What about snakes? What about flies? What about ants? Of course not. I'll make a claim right now. I do not care about the maximum well-being of the hornet's nest outside my house right now. Oh, I'm so evil.
If we wanted to specify sentient life, and not just trees and things like that. Even if we said sentient life, things that feelings and senses and so on. Human beings are massively destructive to lots of species in areas where we move into them, right? So if you're trying to maximize the well-being of the greatest number of beings, then you just got to get rid of humans because most other beings are going to be much better off without.
David Wood is giving a great argument here of why Yahweh if Yahweh exists, why he shouldn't have created humans at all, especially if he knew or predicted what would happen. He's basically saying, hey, if Yahweh likes this idea of maximum well-being, which I think these Christians would admit to, that having heaven and goodness and love and all that. If Yahweh's interested in maximum well-being, why in the world would you create any humans at all? You're better off just maybe if God was bored and needed to express his love, he could have just made dogs. Seems like dogs are a little nicer than humans. They're not as destructive, although there's some mean dogs out there. So yeah, I think David Wood's making a great argument that Yahweh should not have created at all.
Us messing around with them, right?
Let me say the 2 issues I have with this is that maximize well-being, that's already a normative claim. This is what we ought to do. But what if I'm a deontologist? The deontologists say there's certain moral commands we ought to follow regardless if it maximizes well-being or not. So it's wrong to kill regardless. If I could kill on deontology, if I could kill Thanos and prevent him from killing half of all life, I shouldn't, because that's morally wrong, even though it would maximize well-being.
Oh, hang on. Just pause right there so people can understand deontological ethics. There, the famous example from Kant, who's sort of the granddaddy of this view, was if someone comes to your house. If someone comes to your house, someone's borrowed a knife or something like that. Someone comes to your house and says, "I need my knife because I'm about to go hack a bunch of people to death." Notice a lot of people would say, no, I lost that knife. Yeah, sorry. Come back some other time when you're not crazy and about to go on a killing spree. These are the kinds of examples that are used based on stuff that Kant said. But notice, according to Kant, you should not lie, even in that situation. So notice the real life example that you could give here is people during the Holocaust who were hiding Jews and other people in their basements and attics under their floorboards to keep Nazis from coming killing them. The Nazi shows up at the door, knock, knock. You got any Jews hiding here? Kant would say you should not lie. You should,
Not only Kant, I remember asking this question to a lot of Christians, and I don't know, maybe it's divided in my experience, 50-50, but close to half of Christians that I've asked that question to will say, no, don't lie, because Yahweh frowns when you lie. And he smiles when you tell the truth. And we want Yahweh to smile, not frown. They didn't say that, but this is basically, they want to please daddy. And so yeah, you tell the truth if the Nazis knock on the door and you say, no, you say, I got some Jews hidden in here. They're underneath the floorboards. Go help yourself. I think that's immoral. I think the moral thing to do in that situation is to lie. And believe it or not, or you could deceive. You can try to not tell the whole truth and maybe lead them in a wrong direction and try to deceive them, because there's examples of Yahweh deceiving people in the Bible. So if Yahweh can deceive, then I think Christians can deceive. What are you talking about, Doug? If you don't know what I'm talking about, Christians, you haven't even begun to study what you believe.
Well, I was trying to protect him, but I cannot tell a lie, and so it's a situation where the well-being, it doesn't matter. It's all that matters is the moral law there that you have to follow.
Now this gets more to his moral challenge, because he's going to bring this back later and blend these circles. Mm-hmm. But here's my other issue with it. What does it mean to maximize well-being? That just seems like a vague term. As a Christian, you and I would say to maximize well-being means to have obedient faith in Christ and journey towards unity with God. That is ultimately going to be our best well-being. Now, the atheists are going to disagree on our well-being, so this is
the key here. Atheists like me, Christians like Inspiring Philosophy, we both agree that morality has something to do with maximizing well-being. But IP would just say that it's being a slave to Christ, and I would say it's maximizing well-being is helping people be healthier, not suffer, not be in pain, being empathetic, helping them, so forth. And so we're so close, but what Paul's challenge gets to is that there are things that hurt people, but you would say is still moral. This is the point of Paul's challenge, that biblical morality, the God of the Bible, and maximum well-being, that sometimes those two do not intersect at all. Now, the Christian would say, but maximizing well-being will always intersect, because when we die, we'll go to heaven, the Christian talking. And so you can't beat that. That's better. So even if there's suffering on this planet today that the Christian has to go through, which does not maximize your well-being on this planet, you will be compensated for later on. So in net, the overall is your well-being has been maximized. But I think most Christians would agree that there are examples where when God says something or decrees something or wills something, that can hurt people, that can make them sick, that it can kill them. There's many examples in the Bible of that. In fact, yeah, we'll get to it.
An oddly vaguely defined. This is a vaguely defined term. Now he's going to say whatever you mean by maximize well-being. I get that's what he's trying to get at, because when you get to the actual challenge ahead, that'll come up. But it's another thing that's kind of oddly vaguely defined. And I'm a virtue ethicist. I don't think our aim should be to maximize well-being in terms of ethics. I think our ultimate goal as humanity should be, but I think in terms of virtue ethics, our goals should be to obtain certain virtues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also I'm always confused with the maximizing well-being, because notice, as soon as you start saying what it is to maximize well-being, guess what? Hitler was trying to maximize well-being. Right? He believed that in order to maximize well-being, that the great Europeans, he thought they were superior to other groups, and so they should dominate and so on. And he believed that this was good for the world, and that he believed that it was good for the world to exterminate Jews, and that in the long run, these things had to be done to maximize the well-being of humanity.
Yeah, and so the thing is, David Wood agrees with that idea when it's applied to Yahweh. So again, this is so much fun. I'm just going to rewind it a bit. Think Yahweh in the Old Testament as David Wood is explaining Hitler.
The great Europeans, he thought they were superior to other groups, and so
the Israelites, chosen ones,
they should dominate and so on, and
they will lead.
He believed that this was good for the world, and that
the Israelites leading the world by at Yahweh's choosing is good for the world. They'll be saved and redeemed from it.
He believed that it was good for the world to exterminate Jews, and that
Yahweh thought it was good for the world to exterminate almost every person on the planet during the flood, and the Amalekites and the Canaanites.
In the long run, these things had to be done to...
In the long run, Yahweh had to do those things to maximize well-being.
Maximize the well-being of humanity.
Oh, that was so much fun.
Does that mean that any of that was moral? I would certainly say no. But
unless Yahweh sanctioned it. If Yahweh sanctions it, then those exact same actions become good in David Wood's worldview, I think. Okay, I'm going to fast forward it here. Because we don't have time for everything. They still haven't gotten to the actual challenge yet. It's coming eventually. Sorry, Paul. Paul's going, why aren't they talking about my challenge?
He hasn't really explained much. Just I want to make sure everyone understands it, because we do want everyone to understand his argument, right? We hope that atheists understand Christian arguments, and we hope that Christians understand atheist arguments. But so Bible morality, as he seems to be using it, is just whatever the Bible says about right and wrong. And if you came up,
Epic Christ says in the live stream chat, PineCreek, I don't think you really understood David Wood's point. Remember what I said earlier? You have to assume I understand nothing. And when I do say something, you say, oh, PineCreek got it. You're going to be really happy.
Up with everything you could say is about right and wrong solely from the perspective of a moral view that just says, hey, whatever maximizes the well-being of the most number of beings. Again, well, we probably need to scratch that, because then you just end up with nonsense. You'd end up having to kill all human beings to protect other species. But assuming he really means human beings, maximizing human well-being.
On this planet, I don't know if Paul said this, but I think that I would have added that, Paul, if maximizing well-being here on Earth, or make it clear that you're not talking about any type of afterlife, because this is the loophole I think Christians have is even though we're called to suffer, we'll have our well-being maximized when we get to heaven. But for people who are not familiar with Paul's challenge, it's basically the God of the Bible has a nature and morality that outflows from its nature is represented by the yellow. Then you have maximizing well-being, which is helping people be healthier, not suffering and be in pain, and that sort of thing. And so, loving your neighbor, helping your neighbor, treating your neighbor well in the sense of if they're hungry, you feed them. If they're cold, you clothe them, and so forth. That type of idea. And what Paul's saying here is that sometimes those two intersect, but yet we'll have certain things that is moral according to God, which does not maximize your well-being. And I think Christians agree with this because, in fact, I made some notes here. In 1 Peter 2:21, it says that Christians are called to suffer like Christ. Is that maximizing your well-being? In 1 Peter 3:14, suffering is a blessing. In 1 Peter 4, verse 1, you must suffer in the body as Christ does, it says. 1 Peter has a lot of this suffering motif. Is that maximizing your well-being? Well, on this planet, I think you'd have to say no. But don't worry, Doug, there's heaven to come. 2 Corinthians 4, verse 17, expect to be persecuted if you live a godly life, it says. Is being persecuted maximizing your well-being, Christians? Well, at least not your health if they start chopping off your limbs. Luke 14:27, carry your cross as Jesus did. Was Jesus' well-being being maximized at that point? Now you can say in the future, before eternity it was, but not at that moment. Philippians 3 verse 10, participate in Christ's sufferings. You are called to suffer, Christians. Is your suffering a maximizing of your well-being at that moment? This is why I think, Paul, was important that for the Christians, you get the afterlife out of the picture, because then I think they would definitely agree with it then. Okay.
Then if you wrote a list out, if you wrote a list of all the things you should do that would maximize human well-being, you'd have that sort of a collection of rules. And he's pointing out that there's some overlap there. So there are things that the Bible says, like, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or something like that. So don't be a hypocrite. So he could say that, well, that I would say the exact same thing on in my project of maximizing well-being. So there's some overlap, and the overlap there is going to be the green area. The blue area and the yellow area would be areas where that system makes a claim that the other system would reject. So if the Bible says that you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, but maximizing well-being, let's say from an atheist perspective or something like that, would not include that, then that would just be in the yellow section, but not in the shared section. Anything you
I can think of much better examples than that, but I'll hold off.
want to add?
No, I would just simply say what he's going to get to after the challenge, which is he thinks maximizing well-being might be a subset of Bible morality. I would simply say they are equal, in my view, is that Bible morality is equal to maximizing well-being.
Bible morality is equal to maximizing well-being. Listen to that.
In terms of, even extending beyond morality. Mm-hmm. But
Bible morality, Inspiring Philosophy says, is the same as maximizing well-being. This is why I put the title of this video. Am I misrepresenting you? Am I strawmanned you, Inspiring Philosophy? I don't think so. I'm going to play that one more time, and then I'm going to ask some questions.
Be a subset of Bible morality. I would simply say they are equal, in my view, is that Bible morality is equal to maximizing well-being in terms of, even extending beyond morality. Mm-hmm. But
even extending, he didn't really finish his thought there. But how do you then say that the flood was the maximizing of well-being for the people, for the toddlers and babies who drowned? I asked this question in the live stream chat. People didn't like that. The toddler that Jesus drowned in the Old Testament, did that toddler have his well-being maximized at that moment on earth? This is how Christians get around it. They say, well, that toddler went to heaven. What about the pregnant woman who Jesus drowned in the Old Testament? Was the unborn baby and that pregnant mother, was her well-being maximized at that moment when she was drowning? And when your own scriptures, and I just read 6 of them, Inspiring Philosophy, when your own scriptures say that you're called to suffer, what does the word suffer even mean if that's just a form of maximizing well-being? Your own Christianity is a religion that where you're called to take up your cross and follow Jesus and suffer. Suffer. If you're saying suffering is the same as maximizing well-being, what do words even mean anymore? Suffering would be the opposite of maximizing your well-being, wouldn't it? So when you say that Bible morality is the same as maximizing well-being, I'm going to call BS on that. Now, I agree with your loophole. If your loophole is that it maximizes well-being because you get compensated for it in the afterlife, and if all that's true, then I agree with you. I say, okay, You got me on that one. Given this planet, no. I think most Christians would disagree with you here. They would admit that Christians are persecuted and have to suffer and all these things, and their well-being is not being maximized at that moment. Yes, Christoph Keating, thank you for your donation. He says they're talking about what you don't care about, the grounding, ontology, morality. Yes. Well, actually, at this moment, they're talking about just the differences between two worldviews. And inspiring philosophy is basically saying Bible morality is the same, is equal to maximizing of well-being. Okay, I'm just going to keep it playing here.
That's all I would say.
Mm-hmm. So, in other words, if I'm understanding you correctly, there, if you have a Christian, if you're looking at this chart from a Christian perspective, and you're saying, well, if God told us to love Him with all our heart, mind, soul, strength, and to love our neighbors as ourselves, and so on down the list, that all of this is going to be, all of this is, it's maximizing our well-being to do this.
And if God tells you to kill your son, that's also maximizing the well-being, correct or no? This is the point Paul's making, that when God commands people to die for justice reasons, the well-being of that person who's being under justice is not being maximized, right?
And therefore, they're going to be the same thing.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm starting at 418.
Yep, go ahead.
418 in the video, and let's see where he's going with this.
But the diagram isn't attempting to depict any kind.
Thank you for another donation, Christoph. Apologia's definition was maximizing well-being for most beings, not every individual being, so it might even be true in this life for all humans. I'm not sure if I understand what you're saying, but when it comes to most humans, here the flood is a perfect example of something that would be here in the far left portion of the yellow. It was perfectly, according to Christianity, it was perfectly moral for Jesus to flood and kill everybody except for Noah's family. But I don't think we would say for maximizing well-being for most people on the planet that was good for them. They died in a horrible death. They drowned. This applies even if you believe it was a local flood.
And of relative scale only represent the existence of these regions. And now we can get to the challenge expressed in my tweet.
Finally,
challenge
here we go.
to Christians. What is an example of something in the yellow portion that you think most non-believers would agree with instinctively? Presumably because it is both objectively true and...
Actually, sorry for interrupting, Paul, but look at Inspiring Philosophy's head here. Watch Inspiring Philosophy. I know it's small.
is an example of something in the yellow portion that you think most non-believers would agree with instinctively, presumably because it is both objectively true and written on our hearts. In other words, consider actions that the Bible condemns or condones that isn't already condemned or condoned by a system attempting to maximize well-being. If God has indeed written his law on the hearts of everyone, then we would expect that at least a significant portion of the population would accept such proclamation as intuitively correct, even if only deep down below their suppression of said truth. And so, my Christian friends, do you have any examples of actions that fit in the yellow portion while simultaneously affirmed by the conscience of non-believers? If so,
all right, so we got to, I stopped at 5:15 there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you see some difficulties with what he's saying here. So just so everyone knows, what he's saying here, this is his challenge to Christians. So the yellow portion there, the yellow portion is going to be things that the Bible says are right and wrong, and that therefore are supposed to be written on people's hearts, but would not be part of the green area. In other words, you would not believe those things from the perspective of just maximizing well-being. So
so a perfect example, again, I'll go back to the flood. Most mothers listening to me right now, most Christian mothers listening, their intuitions would say that it is not morally good to flood a baby or a toddler, to drown them, unless Yahweh does it, unless Jesus does it. That's the part over here. When Jesus drowns a toddler, that's Bible morality. But when humans drown a baby, that's bad. It's not maximizing well-being. And so this is a perfect example. This is a perfect challenge that Paul is bringing out here is if Yahweh is real and exists, and if Yahweh imparts his morality, this law, through intuitions on our hearts, is how Christians put it, then we wouldn't expect this revulsion to drowning babies in the flood. Now, this is why I asked the poof or drown question. Now, of course, some Christians have no problem with drowning babies as long as God does it. But I think there's a lot of Christians who's, no, this morality in the Bible here doesn't maximize well-being. We agree, Doug. Those are two separate things. But why are they separated at all if this objective morality is on the heart of every human being? That's the question Paul's asking.
Again, if something like do unto others as you would have them do unto you, he could say, yeah, but we would believe the same thing. And so it would be in the green area. I'm saying, what do you have in the yellow area that is written on people's hearts or in their conscience, but would not be part of maximizing well-being?
Nothing. That's my argument. Nothing.
So Inspiring Philosophy's answer is there's nothing that could answer this challenge, because he views well-being, I think, as a subset of Bible morality, that they're equal. Well, he said that earlier, that they're equal. And this is why I said that Inspiring Philosophy and I agree on this. Let me screen capture. This is what I said on, the date's not on here, a long time ago when the challenge came out. I think the challenge is unanswerable. Actually, I want to keep this up here. I think the challenge is unanswerable, since if something is instinctive to a non-believer, like something written on their hearts, then it most likely leads to well-being. Anything like obedience, worship, etc., that God morality, it's moral to worship God, right? Anything like obedience or worship doesn't apply to the non-believer, and anything like love and kindness, etc., would lead to well-being for some, I said, not the psychopaths. So I basically agreed with Inspiring Philosophy here that there is no example of something that is in this portion that maximizes well-being. That what Paul's showing here is that there is a separation, that morality, when you base morality on Yahweh, you have given up this idea of that everything is going to be for your well-being here on the planet. There's going to be some things that will cause you to suffer, but yet it's still moral because of the afterlife, is probably what they would say.
They're being the same thing. I don't think the challenge. I think the challenge is a non-starter. It doesn't really get at what we mean by our normative claim.
Catherine says, you just can't get past the flood, can you, Doug? Well, the flood is the perfect example of probably the worst thing that deity could do to not maximize well-being. Like, that's the perfect example in this case of something that's moral according to the Bible, yet doesn't maximize the well-being of the planet.
What we mean, I don't know. I would just say nothing.
Although Christians would disagree with that. They'd say, well, those people had to die to maximize the well-being. But then the world's getting worse again, according to Christians, so it kind of defeated the whole purpose.
I would just agree with him. There is nothing. But when as a Christian, I would say to be a Christian is to maximize well-being. So
to be a Christian is to maximize well-being. So when atheists, when you're being asked by a Christian, what's your standard of morality? You say, well, it's to maximize well-being. And they say, oh, boo, 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 that's a terrible standard, blah, blah, blah. So, well, Inspiring Philosophy agrees with me. We just differ on how to maximize well-being. He thinks to maximize well-being, you have to be a slave for Christ. And I think it's you don't hurt people. That's simple.
Nothing.
Yeah, I would...
Unnecessarily.
I would explain things a little differently. I'm actually thinking in terms of medieval philosophers distinguish between truths of reason and truths of faith, and they're not using faith. They're not using faith in the way that atheists use it today. The truths of reason were things that you could figure out on your own apart from revelation, and the truth.
Alan Bell asks a great question. What trespass could your wife or children commit that would make you murder them? Actually, it's not that hard. If my wife was drowning, in the process of drowning my children, like that example, that woman in Texas, and the only way I could stop her was to kill her, I'd do it.
Truths of faith were things that were those would be revealed to you. Now they can be repeated, right? So the existence of God would be both a truth of reason and a truth of faith. But I would view moral claims in sort of the same way. There are things that you can just know by nature, and there are things that would be revealed to you. And something can be both, right? You could sit around and figure out, I shouldn't be a hypocrite. I should do unto others as I would have them do to me, and stuff like. You can figure it out, but you can also be told that. You could be told that by Jesus. So I'm thinking of it in terms of that. Now, what he's basically saying is, what he actually believes is sort of written on our conscience as far as how we act. He's just
Inspiring philosophy believes that too.
going to say that we're wired to do that, right?
It's starting up a change. Like we don't really need God. And again, as I've said,
Right. What don't we need God for? We don't need God to explain morality. That's Apologia's main point here, which I guess is similar to the moral argument, philosophical argument, but it's an argument of explanation. We look around at the world around us, and we can explain morality without using a deity or using Yahweh.
no one makes the claim that we need God to understand normative ethics, to understand what it is, to understand meta-ethics. The moral argument...
This is really, I think a lot of Christians are going to get upset at inspiring philosophy here, but he's basically saying we don't need God for these things. We don't need God to explain these things. I'm going to rewind that.
As I've said, no one makes the claim that we need God to understand normative ethics.
No one? I've heard some Christians make that claim.
To understand what it is, to understand meta-ethics. The moral argument is just about moral ontology, what morality actually is. We all agree, and again, when I do meta-ethics, I rely on a lot of atheistic philosophers. A lot of philosophers that are atheists, and also meta-ethicists that are moral realists. And again, I agree completely. We don't need God to understand what morality is.
We don't need God. I'm quoting IP here. We don't need God to understand what morality is. You hear that, Christians? So when you're talking to atheists about morality, atheists, you just quote inspiring philosophy. We don't need God to understand what morality is. Let me rewind that.
A lot of philosophers that are atheists, and also meta-ethicists that are moral realists. And again, I agree completely. We don't need God to understand what morality is. The moral argument is not about understanding morality. It's about what it actually is. How do we ground it?
Yeah, and who cares? Who cares what it actually is? If it's written on our hearts and it's about if what's important is how we treat others and understanding right from wrong, the epistemology. Like, I would love a philosopher to try to convince me that the ontology matters. Like, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I'm saying, who cares what the ontology is if we don't have the epistemology, which we already do, according to both Paul, me, and inspiring philosophy. It's written in our code. Well, we say the grounding is nature itself, and you say the grounding is Yahweh. But really, when we're talking about how we behave with other human beings, who cares what the ontology is? Well, I think Christians care because they don't want Yahweh to frown at them. I really think it's what it boils down to, which it has to do with unnecessary suffering and maximum well-being, because God doesn't like people being rebels against him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So everyone notice what he's doing here. Notice what's going on here. There are certain features that human beings in general would hold to be right and wrong. Don't torture old ladies for fun. That would be bad according to the Bible. That would be bad according to most people.
Torturing people for fun is bad according to the Bible? Is that what you just said, David Wood? See, this is the thing. Like, there's so many problems with your worldview. I'm just repeating the things I've heard Christians say to me. There's so many problems with your worldview that you can't say that. You can't say it's wrong to torture old women. Why do I say that? Because you would admit, David Wood, that if God sanctioned it, then it would be good and moral. But God would never sanction such a thing, Doug. Are you sure? What if he has morally sufficient reasons to? David would. This is the problem with your worldview. And I think you can reasonably give examples in the Old Testament of not people just dying, but going through a lot of pain and turmoil on the way to die that God decreed and commanded. And you have no problem saying that's moral because that's part of his justice, right? But it doesn't maximize their well-being, does it?
So let's say it's in that green area. It's in that green area. So we have some sort of common moral belief. We believe that it's wrong to torture old ladies for fun,
unless God sanctioned it.
What we're trying to get at in the moral argument is what is the status of that? Is it just something you've been raised to believe in your society? And if you notice, you could raise a kid from the time he's born to believe that the greatest thing he can do in the world is torturing old ladies for fun, right? There are people in Pakistan who believe that if your sister walks down the street without a male escort, you have a moral obligation to beat her to death, right? And they believe that that's right. They really strongly believe that. So the question is, what is the status of our beliefs? Are all our moral claims simply this is what our society taught?
Simply, see, this is getting back to that psychological need to have gravitas behind that David Wood's bringing back. Like, if it's just society, if it's merely just society, then I can't. I want to say people are really, really, really bad, and I can't say people are really, really, really wrong and bad unless I got this God person backing me up. I think this is what it's all about. A lot of it.
Taught us, or are these things wired into us? Because when we're asking the question, guys, I'm perfectly serious when I say I really want to know what you say. I really want to know how you understand these claims. Because if you're just describing it in terms of hardwiring, I don't see why that's good to just follow your hardwiring, right? If some people,
why is it good to follow Yahweh? See, these are the questions you have to ask yourself back. Well, why? I don't understand why it's good just to follow your hardwiring. I don't understand that. Well, why ought someone follow Yahweh? Why ought someone? This is a question I asked in the live stream chat as well, and this is a problem. The is ought dilemma. Is ought? No. Yeah, you can't get a ought from an is. So even if the ontology of Yahweh is true, that says nothing about why one should follow this God. Christians, why should anyone obey Yahweh? Think about it. Does it maximize their well-being? Well, if you're IP, you would say yes, but I think most Christians would say no, because you're called to suffer here on earth. So why ought you follow God? Why ought you obey God? There's basically two answers that I've gotten from that, and that is because it's what you should do by definition. Doing the right thing is what you should do by definition. Another answer is because if you don't do it, there's consequences. And the consequences is eternal suffering, and if you do obey God, then the consequences is being in heaven with him for eternity, which gets back to maximizing well-being and unnecessary suffering.
Some people, just with their wiring in their brain, they want to molest children. Some people want to rape just based on the way they're wired, right? Some people are more violent just based on the way they're wired. What does this have to do with those things being right, following the way you're wired or following your instincts or something?
Yeah, but aren't these examples like psychopaths and people with an inclination to rape and all these things? What does that say if the moral code, if these intuitions come, if the ontology is Yahweh, what does that say about Yahweh? Oh, Doug, you're forgetting about the fall in the Garden of Eden. That's, it was good before then, and then, okay, got it.
Like that. So if you're going down that road, I don't see that that's a good idea. If you're saying that, it's whatever your society says is right, then again, other societies have completely different ways of looking at things, like your sister walking down the street. And so if it's just whatever your society says, well, you've got a problem if you're not going to say this society versus that society. So go ahead.
There's a comment in chat. So per IP, there's no argument for God for morality.
Oh my goodness.
No. Again, go back to the original slides in the beginning. We're arguing about, when we argue for God's existence, it's about moral ontology, not meta-ethics, not normative ethics. We don't argue from...
But how can you argue for God's existence without using epistemology within the context of the moral argument? Because aren't you saying things like objective morality exists based on what? How do you know? I think a lot of Christians say, well, because of what we see around us in the world. Like people, they say things are really, really wrong. And we have this intuition that some things are really, really, really wrong. So I don't know how you can completely separate the ontology from the epistemology, even within the context of the moral argument.
For God's existence from normative ethics or meta-ethics, we argue for God's existence from moral ontology. The person clearly doesn't understand the slides I went over at the beginning of the different branches I was talking about.
Yeah, so notice, I mean, we started this whole thing off by pointing out that atheists, and again, not all atheists, a lot of the people who watch my channel are atheists. Some of the biggest fans who watch my channel are atheists. Again, I do live streams with atheists. I get along with lots of atheists. The atheists who are sort of aggressive and going out and refuting, they just seem to overwhelmingly, completely misrepresent what the arguments are. And we start off...
Yes, your expectations are way too high of atheists. You need to lower them as low as you can, and then you'll be pleasantly surprised in the future.
Off by pointing out that atheists have a problem accurately representing arguments. We gave an example by showing that when we talk about atheist arguments, we try to represent them accurately. Then we play this video, which is a massive misunderstanding of the moral argument and what's at stake in the moral argument. And then
he hasn't gotten to that yet. He hasn't gotten to that yet. I agree. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. And so, but in this video, and then in the comments are people who are misrepresenting what IP is.
I just want to point out that for people who don't believe in atheists, Christians who don't believe in atheists, they sure talk about atheists a lot. You know why I say that? Because why do you keep talking about God, Doug? If you don't believe in God, I want to point out the obvious fact here is that I would say most, over 50% of Christians misunderstand the philosophical arguments that David and IP are talking about here. They are Christians because they had an experience and they love Jesus. They love Jesus. That's what it's about for them. And so, but I guess it's not good to pick on Christians misrepresenting, rather than pick on those evil atheists, right? Evil. Okay, I need to get moving here. Let's go to 102.50 here.
Hearing your insights. Unfortunately, no criteria meeting examples have been offered so far on Twitter. General ideas like love and kindness would be affirmed by a criteria maximizing well-being, so would therefore be part of the green portion. Ideas like aversion to taking the Lord's name in vain would be yellow, but would not typically twinge the conscience of a non-believer, particularly if they were raised outside of a Christian culture. Some suggested, potentially reasonably, that there would be no blue section.
Okay, did you hear what Paul just said there? Paul gave it a very simple and great example. That's not as heinous as the one I did about flooding babies. Using the Lord's name in vain. There's an example clear example that's wrong. If you're a Christian, I think you would agree, taking the Lord's name in vain is wrong. It's a sin. And so that would be over here in the yellow. But I think for people who are not Christians or not Jews or Muslims, let's just say atheists, they wouldn't view that as wrong because it has nothing to do with, in fact, some people say swearing increases your well-being. Some studies have said that helps release lower stress and so forth. So actually taking the Lord's name in vain might actually help your well-being. So here's a very simple example of where those two don't intersect. But we should expect those things to intersect if God has put morality on the hearts of everyone.
Some suggested, potentially reasonably, that there would be no blue section, that green would wholly be a subset of yellow, that the Bible encompasses all things that...
You see, IP was nodding his head. This is IP's Venn diagram, that basically being a Christian is to maximize well-being.
Improve well-being. I suspect that this is not the case, but I could grab that here and it wouldn't change the challenge. It would still be, what is an example of something in the yellow portion? The blue part wasn't actually part of the question. And why do I even ask the question? Well, if we don't have a good list of things in the yellow that are simultaneously affirmed by the intuitions of significant portions of non-believers, then it would seem that the green portion is what is meant when apologists appeal to objective morality, not the yellow circle.
Right, and this is for the reason of if you believe that the ontology is Yahweh and he impresses upon the hearts of the human, the soul, of that intuitive sense of what's right and wrong. You don't need the Bible to determine what's right and wrong according to IP. Of course, it's great, but it's on the hearts of mankind. Then you would expect that then, well, something's wrong here. Because there's definitely some things that are right and wrong in the yellow portion, but if it's written on the hearts of men, why do we have it only in the green portion? This is the brilliant challenge that Paul is bringing up here.
However, it would also show that everything within this objective morality can be arrived at merely with the principle of minimizing pain and maximizing well-being. At the same
I'm pausing it at 643.
Yeah, what Paul's basically saying here is if the green part is representing what God, the ontology of Yahweh, has imparted on the hearts of everyone, if that's the green portion, and that's within the maximizing of well-being, what Paul is saying is we don't need Yahweh to ground morality. We don't need him. We can ground morality in maximizing well-being.
Yep. Good point. I was going to say that.
There's a misunderstanding in almost everything he says. He says. Like even what he says about objective morality, he says...
Again, David Wood, please just assume everything is going to be misunderstood what you say.
He apparently, when he says objective morality, he says, apparently what Christian apologists mean by objective morality is what's in the green there. No, never, not once, ever, right?
No, it's normative ethics.
Yeah,
it's not meta ethics.
I've been in debates with atheists.
Yeah, come on, don't be silly. That's normative ethics, not meta ethics.
Before, where they seem to think that
that's about the epistemology, not the ontology. Man, I wish people would get to study philosophy more. It's like they're just so ignorant.
What we mean by objective morality is things that everyone agrees on, or things that most people agree on. Guys, the idea of objective morality or an objective moral.
What Paul is saying is we use epistemology to figure out what maybe the ontology actually is. It's like we use the epistemology of looking at the world around us and trying to come up with an explanation for it. And the explanation that you guys come up with is, Yahweh. He explains why we have these feelings on our heart are in these intuitions, whereas guys like Paul and I say, well, no, it's evolution, which he's getting to soon.
Standard or objective moral duties or something like that is, it wouldn't matter if every last person on the entire planet rejected it. It would still be objectively true. It would be an objective moral truth. In other words, if every person on the planet tomorrow decided that it's a good thing to torture old ladies for fun, if it's objectively morally wrong to torture old ladies for fun, it wouldn't matter what everyone believed. It matters what is morally true.
So my challenge for Christians listening is, if God really, really did this, if he actually caused the utmost suffering for the whole planet, every human being on the planet, starting tomorrow for 3 hours, the worst possible suffering you can imagine, if God actually did this, you would say, am I wrong? You would say that is morally good. I dare anyone to say that's morally wrong if God actually did it. Now tell me, does that maximize their well-being for those 3 hours? Well, Doug, he has morally sufficient reasons, and yeah, maybe it would. I don't know.
So he says, apparently they think that...
Okay, I'm going to fast forward it here. I'm having too much fun. And it's going too long. Okay, so this is where we start getting into the evolution part. The actual ontology grounding, the grounding.
Merely with the principle of minimizing pain and maximizing well-being. At the same time, a desire to avoid pain and to seek thriving are entirely survival traits. They are fully grounded in biology. You might want to argue that creatures are not inherently obligated to seek survival, and that is true, but any group of creatures that does not seek survival will go extinct. Non-survival genes don't get passed around as often as survival genes. We creatures alive today are descendants of creatures that wanted to survive. Since by definition, everything in the green is sufficiently explained by pursuit of well-being, the desire for which is sufficiently explained by biological survival advantage, and if what Christians call objective morality is contained entirely in the green portion, then God is not necessary to explain it. You may...
All right, I'm going to pause it right there at 7:34. He finished.
Yep, I'm there too. Yeah, it's God is not necessary to explain.
He once again said that what Christians mean by objective morality is what's in the green. No, it's not. Not. Okay,
he said God is not necessary to explain it. He's talking in this whole thing about normative ethics. Like we have to maximize well-being or we have to survive, whatever the normative claim is there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, God is not necessary. No one argues from normative ethics to God's existence.
Did you hear what Inspiring Philosophy he didn't finish his sentence. I wish he would have. But Inspiring Philosophy agrees with Paul and me, I'm saying me because I'm talking right now, that you don't need God to explain morality.
Like we have to maximize well-being or we have to survive, whatever the normative claim is there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, God is not necessary. No one argues from normative ethics to God's existence. It's about moral ontology. Mm-hmm. So when he presented...
Yes, so you don't need... God, we use... The moral argument is to show that the ontology for morality is God. I think that's what he would say. But of course I'm misrepresenting them because I'm an atheist. But what Paul and guys like myself are saying that, hey, trying to explain the world around us, we have no need of your deity. Sorry, we don't need him for morality. And Inspiring Philosophy agrees. Not for the ontology part, but for the epistemology part. For explaining it. For explaining the world around us, we have no need of your God when it comes to morality. And Inspiring Philosophy agrees with that. Am I wrong, Inspiring Philosophy? Maybe I'll play it one more time.
Normative ethics to God's existence. It's about moral ontology. Mm-hmm. So when he presented this moral challenge, he was trying to get to this point that God is not necessary to explain it. And I'm like, yeah. But again, the moral argument is in moral ontology, not normative ethics. So the challenge is a non-starter to really make the Christian think about if God is necessary, because God still is necessary in terms of moral ontology, not normative ethics.
Yeah, and I just asked, well, who cares about moral ontology?
That was never the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and let me go ahead and say, let me be charitable and say where I would agree, right? If he's saying that our species...
The reason why I say that, who cares about moral ontology, is because it's the epistemology that counts. That's what affects people on the ground on a day-to-day level, is how they figure out things, how they know things.
Is wired to seek their own well-being, and so you're wired to seek your well-being, and part of seeking your well-being is that you're wired to seek your family's well-being, and we just have kind of a herd instinct that makes us want to help others. If that's what you mean when you say that stealing is wrong or killing is wrong, is that it somehow conflicts with our herd instinct to sort of seek the general well-being or something like that, I would say no. As far as arguments are concerned, God would not be necessary for that. I would think God would be necessary.
Hey, so David Wood's even now agreeing with Paul.
For a lot of other things that go into your position, such as even having a universe or having a universe, having a world with those kinds of creatures and so on. But if basically what you're saying is, hey, I'm wired to seek other, the well-being of other people, and so I try not to hurt people and stuff like that. Prove to me that God is necessary for that. That's not what we're saying. We're saying we're assuming
you're saying that you don't need God to explain those things.
That you guys mean something beyond that, right? We're assuming that when you say,
I actually think there's going to be a lot of Christians upset at these two.
That you shouldn't torture old ladies for fun. We are assuming you mean something beyond, I was wired by, biological processes to not.
Okay, I'm going to fast forward it here. By the way, is there any Christians in the live stream chat right now who admit that they're not happy with these, at least Inspiring Philosophy, that you disagree with them? Okay.
The reason we desire to maximize well-being comes from biology. That would at best just explain moral epistemology. Mm-hmm.
Right. This is, I agree. It explains the moral epistemology, why we have these moral intuitions.
If evolution is true, and that's how we evolved to...
But why can't evolution be the foundation of it? Why couldn't nature itself be the ontology of it, if it can explain it. This is where they would disagree vehemently. It's like, well, you can't get something from nothing. Don't be stupid, Doug.
Get to that point, you could just say, well, God evolved us in a direction to get to us that point so that we can understand morality. Just like you could say we evolved to understand mathematics. Doesn't mean mathematics is a social construct. Just like we evolved to understand science doesn't even mean science is a social construct. Just because that's how we understand or how we came to learn what morality is, that doesn't mean that's all that morality is. It's just how we came to understand about it. So just try to say, well, these are just biological instincts that we have. So it doesn't really get to the point of what philosophers are talking about when they get, well, what do we mean? What do we mean by ethics? What is morality objective? Is it not? Is it just something we've constructed?
It's like you got to have a pipe in your hand. Like, what do we mean by ethics? What do we mean by morality? If you don't know the difference between normative and metaethics and all these cognitive and non-cognitive versions, you just don't know what you're talking about. It's the ontology that makes us the pipe taste sweeter.
Is it something we've discovered? It's a little different there. So I don't. And again, this has nothing to do with God. So the whole challenge as a non-starter is trying to get.
This has nothing to do with God. Your whole challenge there, Paul, has nothing to do with God. And yet, people who believe in God are critiquing it. That's interesting. I guess they just needed to tell people that's not about God.
Check out those channels. All right. Well, we're done with that video. So what do you think? Massive misunderstanding here?
Again, it's when we talk about why God is required for morality in general, we're talking about moral ontology. And what we talked about last week is I just said, if you believe in non-natural moral realism, that just means you believe God exists. They're the same thing. Non-natural moral realism is the same thing as saying God exists. It has nothing to do with normative ethics. It has nothing to do with moral epistemology. It's a moral ontological claim. So I will keep using the moral argument because you can explain any system of normative ethics without referencing God, that doesn't get to the argument that is the moral argument. So I think it just misses the mark, unfortunately. And I like Paul. I don't think this is entirely his fault. I think some Christians are bad at explaining the moral argument. I think they're bad at explaining metaethics. And sometimes I just, but again, metaethics is hard. I was listening to Ruth Schaefer-Landau today, and even he stopped at one point. He's an atheist and he's a moral philosopher, and he just stopped and he said, I need to stop because I'm about to say something false. So let me reword this. Even he struggles explaining this sometimes. Ethics is a hard subject to explain and study.
It is.
So I don't think it's entirely his fault. I just think.
Yeah, it's a very hard topic. Even philosophers stumble upon how to explain these things. And yet you want your Christian followers to gobble it up and understand it, explain it. You should just encourage them to love Jesus, because that's the reason why they believe in the first place. They don't need any arguments. They don't need no stinking philosophical arguments to believe that God exists. They already believe God exists. So.
But again, I think you just need to understand that that's not what the moral argument is. It has nothing to do with.
My Lord. That's the name of a person in live stream chat. $5 donation. Thank you. Do you think some Christians prefer these kinds of arguments to avoid discussions about historicity of the Old Testament and New Testament writings? I don't think that wouldn't apply to these guys. But I do think that what I said earlier is true, that a lot of Christians use philosophical arguments to not feel stupid about believing a man walked on water and rose from the dead. Because if they can picture this God that loves them and wants them to spend eternity with him and has the power to do these things, then it all makes sense, right?
The challenge here.
Yeah, and maybe I know you've got lots of videos dealing with various philosophical issues like this, but yeah, I might make some arguments where I'm very careful in explaining everything that I mean, because guys, I used to teach philosophical ethics at Fordham. Been out of that for a while, so I'm not up to date on the latest. But it's not like the main positions have changed much in the past 10 years. But so I taught philosophical ethics at Fordham, and to this day, I cannot understand. I have no idea. I have no idea how atheists ground ethics. I know the theories.
You have no idea how they ground it? See, I don't buy this. I think this is disingenuous. If you don't have any idea how some atheists ground ethics, then you're not bright. You're low IQ. Can you not put yourself in someone else's shoes and at least guess what they would say? I think what you really mean to say, David Wood, because I don't think you have a low IQ, is that you just disagree with how they ground it. But to say you don't know how they ground it, come on. Thank you, Derek, for the donation.
I know the theories that many atheists would adhere to, but when I try and understand...
Okay, so this here he's admitting, I know what they would say, but of course that can't be right.
And when I say atheism here, so an atheist will say, but that's just lack of belief in God. That doesn't tell you about the rest of my worldview. So I'm using it in the sort of stronger sense of naturalism. I cannot fathom how you ground your moral claims and views in naturalism. And so in that sense,
I can't fathom how you can ground it in Yahweh. So there we're equal.
I would agree with Frank Turek that you seem to be borrowing them from somewhere else and you just don't realize it.
I think you're borrowing from my worldview and you just don't realize it. You see how this doesn't accomplish anything, David Wood? You see how I could just right back on you?
But as far as what Apologia was saying, that, as far as what we're wired to do, if he's just saying, hey, we're wired to do certain things that are, that help our species, if that's all you mean by your moral claims, if when you say this is wrong, you really mean I'm wired to feel like this is wrong, but there's nothing objectively wrong about it, but I'm just wired to feel this way, I would agree. I would not base an argument for the existence of God based on that. The assumption here is that
Was Paul's video to have anything to do with an argument for the existence of God? I don't think so.
Mean something more than that, and atheists generally do. And notice, you have to. When you start complaining about this or that thing that other people have done, or when you start condemning God for not doing this, when you say God ought to have revealed himself or something like that, you're making moral claims and you're saying that our rules would even apply to God. That doesn't seem like something you would get from just the way you're wired to help your species.
There's gorillas who will follow and submit and do everything the silverback does. Have you ever seen YouTube videos of how a whole tribe will follow one sentient being, a male gorilla? What if we are the same way, except we were smarter and we made our silverbacks invisible, because there's less trouble that way?
You would then be telling God he has to do certain things, or that he has a moral obligation to do certain things. So it sounds like you mean something more by your moral claims than what we're getting from Apologia here. So the question, again, if anyone's if you haven't understood a lot of what we said, guys, the simple claim is when you...
Oh, Christoph, good point. Apologia's video was responding to a video by Frank Turek presenting the moral argument. So yes, yeah, you're right. I'm wrong then. If I wasn't sure about that, because Paul's own words, I don't think he actually... said the words moral argument, but because he played the Frank Turek video, I see what you're saying. But I think Frank Turek was talking about boring what David Wood is talking about, boring from worldviews. So I'm still not sure if Frank Turek actually bringing up the premises and so forth of the moral argument.
Say something like murder is wrong. What is that? What is the status of that claim? You're making a statement. Are you saying it's your personal preference? Are you saying it's what your society teaches? Are you...
Yeah. Are you saying murder is wrong? David Wood, are you saying that's God's preference? Are you saying that that's God's opinion? What do you actually mean when you say murder is wrong? And if someone is killed by Yahweh, is that murder? When is murder murder? When is murder not murder? If God sanctions what you think is murder, and then later you find out that if you see an action, if you see one man kill another man, and you say that's murder, that's wrong, because God said so, and later you find out that God sanctioned it, then it's not wrong, right? You change your mind? I think you would have to say yes at this point. So basically, you have subjectively chosen as your standard of morality Yahweh, and saying that you ought to obey him. Why? I'm not sure, because it's by definition, or because he can hurt you if you don't, which is probably a good reason if it's true. If God can really hurt you if you don't obey him, then maybe you should obey him.
You're saying you're wired to think that way. Any of those options, which you could, given, you could be an atheist and say, I'm wired to think this way. You could be an atheist and say, this is what my society teaches. That would all be consistent. But if that's where your moral claims are grounded, you got some problems here. You have some massive problems. And at the end of the day...
See you, JD. Thanks for coming. I find it interesting when he says, if this is your grounding, you have some massive problems. You got some big problems in your worldview. Man, David Wood, go to Facebook, go to a Facebook group called Wrestling with the Disturbing Things in Scripture. I think that's what it's called, Wrestling with the Disturbing Things in Scripture. And talk to your fellow Christians there. It's called Wrestling with the Disturbing Parts of Scripture. Talk to your fellow Christians there. They're wrestling with this stuff. And so when you say stuff like this...
Hey, are you saying it's your personal preference? Are you saying it's what your society teaches? Are you saying you're wired to think that way? Any of those options, which you could, given, you could be an atheist and say, I'm wired to think this way. You could be an atheist and say, this is what my society teaches. That would all be consistent. But if that's where your moral claims are grounded, you got some problems here. You have some.
And if your moral claims are grounded in Yahweh, you got some huge problems, because I want you to, if you ever watch this video, David Wood, I want you to go to your wife and ask her to imagine Jesus taking your children, remember when they were toddlers, taking your children and Jesus slowly pushing them under the water, and they're struggling and then they die. That's what Jesus did. I think you believe that, David Wood. This is your moral ontology, right? But you think that this is maximizing well-being because that child is now in heaven. I'm doing another flood. Sorry, Catherine, I'm doing another flood analogy.
Some massive problems. And at the end of the day, I don't think you really believe that, right? I mean, I don't think you really believe that your moral claims are just a matter of society or something like that. You could say that, but I don't think you really believe it.
I always find it enjoyable when people tell me what I really believe and what I don't really believe. It brings me warm feelings inside. David Wood, you don't really believe in Yahweh. You say you accepted Jesus Christ because of the evidence, but you know that's not true, right, David Wood? You see how this works, David? Come on, you're smarter than this, man.
Because if so, then you couldn't condemn other societies and so on. All right, any final thoughts?
Okay, that's the end. Actually, I do think Inspiring Philosophy is way smarter than David Wood. It's not even close. Is that harsh? I'm not saying David Wood is stupid. I'm not saying that. I'm saying IP is way smarter than David Wood. That's what I'm saying, based on this one video. And David Wood, for the record, I appreciate you and what you've done in your videos combating Islam and so forth. In fact, it's because of you I don't do that sort of thing, because there's no need to, because you're doing it. Amelia Portman says, hit the nail on the head with the silverback analogy. Theists need an ultimate father figure, a psychological need for ultimate authority. Yeah, I think that's what it boils down to. And I think evolution can explain that need. This is why I think a lot of God beliefs are based on personality types as well. You're more likely to leave a God belief if you're more antisocial, more maverick-ish, more of critical thinking, more likely to ask questions. Yeah, I just judged all of you, I know, forgive me, but that's my opinion. Okay, let's start the music. If anybody has some bad things to say to me in the live stream, I'll be watching them in a few seconds. Let me just check my levels. Okay, they're good. Yes, John Robertson, I agree with you. Theists are borrowing from the naturalistic worldview and just attributing it to Yahweh. Actually, I have a little thing here. Never mind. The marketplace of ideas produces our knowledge, including moral knowledge. Thanks for triggering me deliberately with the pipe thing. You're welcome. Evolution explains that stuff like the assembly line explains cars. It's a mechanistic kind of explanation, but doesn't replace the agent explanation. Christoph, this is why I think a lot of Christians are Christians, theists are theists. They need to feel special. Okay, this might be cruel, but I'm going to tell you guys the truth. And by the way, I tell wow. You're listening, Christians? You're listening, atheists? You're listening, everyone in the world? You're not special. You're not special. Deal with it. In the big scope of things, you're not special. But I think a lot of people cannot deal with that, and so they have to have this deity out there who imports this specialness to them. I say that because your comment reminded me of that mechanistic thing, that if we're just animals, how in the world are we special? Well, I'm just going to squash that right now and say you're not special. But your mom loves you. I'm sure your mom loves you. If your mom doesn't love you, then you're really not special. By the way, I'm not crazy. My mother had me tested. Speaking of mothers. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit longer here. Thanks, Paul. Don't worry, PineCreek. You're very special and God loves you very much. You should make Christian flyers, Salem. You'd be good at that. Good to see you here, Sovereign Soul. I would agree with you, Sully. Bredlowski says, as your tribe increases, you become moral. You are able to empathize with more people. I hope so. Poof. My apologies to David Wood and Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy. They were scheduled to come on, but we ran out of time. Have a great day, guys. We'll see you next time.